You ready?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm Austin Lugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say.
Let's talk about Nightmare Alley.
Before we get into this week's film, next week we're going to be watching Still Walking. I've only seen one film by this filmmaker, Shoplifters, which is probably his most famous film. It was pretty big when it came out. People were really excited about it. I'd never heard of this director before that film came out, and I haven't seen any of his other stuff since. So I admit I'm a little behind on the train on this one, but I've seen more than you because you haven't seen any of his
Yeah, I
stuff.
haven't seen any of his stuff yet. No.
Shoplifters is good. I really enjoyed it. I don't remember much because I think I saw it in theaters back in 2018. So it's been
Hmm. Hmm.
5 years since I've seen some of his stuff. But I remember having quite a good time with it. So I'm excited to see more of his stuff. I'm pumped. I'm ready.
Me too.
So this week we watched the original Nightmare Alley, 1947.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had seen the Guillermo del Toro one in theaters, which came out in 2021, I think, which you hadn't seen, right? You haven't seen the Guillermo del Toro one, had you?
No, I thought about maybe watching it this week, but life's too short. I didn't really feel like watching it, so
So
it's too long.
I'll
It's
talk
probably
about
fine. I
this.
just didn't want to
Yeah,
watch it.
I mean, I'll probably reference it a bit because it'd be weird not to reference it. But I'll start by saying that it's the exact same movie. Like he changed one thing at the very end. The ending's different. It's darker, which we'll get into later in this podcast. But otherwise, it's shot for shot, same dialogue. I mean, it's a little more updated. It doesn't they don't have those, mid-Atlantic accents or whatever, but it's almost the exact same movie, making me wonder why he remade the film in the first place.
I think like this movie's almost 2 hours, and then the original is 2.5 hours. If there's anything that I guess I can kind of see maybe where Guillermo's coming from because by the way, both movies are essentially based off a novel which I've heard is good
Right.
by William
Hmm.
Lindsay Gresham. Um, it's actually an NWRB classics book, so I'll probably get around to like reading it sometime.
Yeah.
Um, but I can kind of like see like after watching the original, which is great by the way, I loved it just to kind of kind of
Yeah.
skip to it. But I can kind of see the compulsion or like kind of like the desire to want to make a remake because it's like the movie's great, but like it does feel like it could be longer, like there could be like more like details and stuff added into it to make it even more fleshed out than it is. So I'm sure at the end of the day, this old one, the original movie, is better than the GDT movie, um I can kind of see where maybe he was coming from, being like, I want like I want more out of it, So I don't know. Um, yeah,
Yeah. And I certainly see the appeal of wanting to remake your favorite films. I mean, this is obviously a film that had a big impact on Del Toro's work. It's very clear that he was someone who was a huge fan of noir and all of his work and a lot of inspiration from it. And particularly with the remake of this film, it's clearly like something he fell in love with as a younger filmmaker. And I suppose there is something sort of full circle esque and sort of remaking the films that kind of you grew up with.
sure, yeah.
And a lot of filmmakers do something of this effect, whether they're literally remaking the same film or it's more of a metaphorical remake of a film that they loved as a kid. So I understand the appeal, and it is more fleshed out, I suppose, in the GDT one than the original because it is a bit longer. But I don't know if having it more fleshed out really brings anything new to the piece. Again, I haven't seen this since
Yeah.
it originally came out, so I did not rewatch it before getting into today's podcast, so I'm a little hazy on it, but I remember it pretty well, especially after watching the original version. And it's point for point. The only difference is the stuff with the psychologist. There's more of that. I think everything else is almost exactly the same. I mean, similar shots, exact same cast in the sense like not literal, obviously, but like same characters, I guess you could say. And overall, it's very much a replication of the piece, which is really strange to watch these movies. It would be a really strange double feature because there's not a whole lot of differences between these pieces. As usually there are, there's usually some big differences with remakes of a film and ways to make it more exciting. But I will say Guillermo del Toro definitely stuck to the roots of this piece as best he could. But personally, I think the original is better, although I do like the ending to GTTs more than the ending to the original.
I don't know the end of the novel. I don't know. I
Should
don't
look
know.
it up.
Maybe
I'm gonna look up the ending to the novel.
I'm assuming that the GDT ending is darker.
Yes, it is. In the GDT film, when he becomes a geek at the end of the movie, instead of like him being saved and having like that loving
Yeah.
moment and a kiss and all that,
Yeah.
she like comes to the carnival and sees him like eating a chicken, and he's basically like just
Okay.
he's become the next geek because
I,
they do this cool thing in the GDT one where like at the very beginning when the guy comes in because he's like I want to be a mentalist or blah blah or whatever, which of course is played by Bradley Cooper, he asks about the geek. He's like, how do you find your geek? And he's like, well, geek isn't found, they're made. What happens is the guy is a little drunk, we pull him off, and we slowly convince him that, oh, it's just until we find someone else. And then a week goes into 2 weeks, and basically, like, these geeks aren't found, they're made by slowly kind of convincing
right.
drunk
Yeah. Yeah.
people to exist
Well,
in
they
this
they
world.
they literally say that in the original movie, like the movie we just
Yeah.
watched at the very beginning of the movie. And I just looked it up. The novel ends. He like it ends like it doesn't end in the way, like it's not a positive ending. Like he takes the geek job, and I think that's like the end.
I think that's a better
So
ending. I mean, I
it
understand
probably
why
is.
they probably did that. It's probably like a studio thing because bad endings to movies didn't sell well in the
Yeah, the
1940s.
1940s, the it's a very 1947 ending to a movie.
Yeah,
Like that's just kind of how all they end, right? Like all movies like that end, so it's not really like that unpredictable, I guess. But yeah, I guess like the ending is better. But that darker ending is better, where he becomes a geek, which I do enjoy. Um, I do like how kind of dark and seedy that is.
and I
Instead of just like, yeah, his like girlfriend appears and saves him. Like, okay, I guess it's nice.
yeah, I mean it's a nice ending and it makes it for a more feel good ending, but it kind of overlays the themes of the whole film, which is this whole idea of like him getting his comeuppance and sort of this full circle hubris kind of thing going on. That's
Yeah, yeah,
very
yeah. Well, and not even like the full circle thing too, but like also like the tarot cards, of course, are a big part of it. Like the destiny, them
right.
predicting the future. Like basically, the movie is basically like telegraphed ahead of time, like what's gonna happen. Like there are two card readings in the movie, right?
Yes.
And then they both come true. Um, and that's I like that stuff a lot. I like the card readings. I just kind of like the hanging, like they keep like drawing like the hanging man, and which I believe the hanging man is like, I believe that card is like um uh what's the word I'm trying to think of? Um like it's not necessarily negative, but it's not necessarily positive. Like I think it's
Right.
kind of like a double-sided kind of card.
Yeah, I
Um
think that's true with all the cards, right? Even death. Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
it's not
I get
necessarily
that's a
bad.
good point. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Nothing is necessarily bad, although like I don't know. Death seems, I don't know. I guess it depends on what you're talking about. Um, but yeah, I like this stuff a lot. And yeah, I mean, like this movie is just kind of like this movie reminded me a lot of like a noir, like a Double Indemnity,
Yeah.
where it's kind of like um, it's like a movie about like people kind of like double crossing each other and like trying to like and Detour as well, honestly, a little bit.
Love
Like kind of
Detour.
like Detour is great, and I love Double Indemnity. I think that was one of the greatest movies ever made. Like it's like about like people like in these kind of like fucked up like configurations and relationships trying to rip off people. And it never goes well at the end.
There's never a happy ending, which is so weird that this film ends on the note that it does, because typically with a noir film, even during this era, I mean, you think of Detour, and not only is this a dark film, but Detour also is a classic depression film, right? So it's made during the Great Depression, a very depressing time to be an American citizen, and that doesn't have a happy ending. So I don't know what the need to have the happy ending on this. It does definitely feel like it's sort of pasted in onto the end of the
It doesn't really
piece.
bother me all that much. It doesn't really bother me all that much. I know you're bothered by it, but I don't really
I
care
am.
all that much about that. Who cares? Like, I don't know. Like the movie itself, the rest of the movie is fine. The
This
ending
movie's great.
endings don't ruin anything for me typically.
No.
Um uh yeah. I kind of like I like the carnival. So I guess to kind of talk about the movie like a little bit, like kind of um it's not a very complicated movie. Sometimes like you watch a noir and it has like a really complex plot.
Yeah.
This one not really. It's pretty cut and dry. You get Stan's our main character. He is like a he's a barker. And he wants to be rich. And so he meets Xena, and Xena and her husband Pete. Pete's a horrific alcoholic. Um, and they rip off people because she pretends to be like a she pretends to like read people's minds or whatever. Um, and he finds out that they have like they created a special code to be able to communicate with each other by the way that they talk, which I thought that aspect was really interesting.
That's wild.
I like that stuff a lot, yeah. And and uh and he makes a mistake, and they do like a and they talk he talks with Xena about like maybe like using that code and doing their own thing, but she
Yeah.
like I think she decides not to, right? And
Because of her
then
husband.
yeah, because of her husband, after the card reading, right? And then Stan in that great scene where they like I love that scene where they talk to each other before he dies. That's a
Oh, yeah.
classic scene.
That great sort of like mentor passing on to the mentee moment. And he hides the alcohol because he just bought alcohol. He knows the guy's drunk and he feels bad, so he gives him the alcohol, or maybe it's manipulation. There's also like this sort of psychoanalytical thing, which I know people in the 1940s they fucking love psychoanalysis. It's of that era
I
very
love it
much.
too. I think it's there's not enough in it in movies nowadays. Now everything is like good or bad.
Yeah.
Um you said there was like a you said that like Stan meant to give him the wood alcohol. Is that what you said?
Almost like instinctual. Not necessarily that he was doing it on purpose, but like sort of like there's this almost unconscious need to succeed and to ruin
Right,
this
yeah, he
person's
wanted
life.
it. Well, yeah, but the cards like say it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the cards like early on are just like, bro, like we're gonna make a lot of money and stuff, but it says here that Pete's gonna die. Um, and that's exactly what happens, right? And you're right, it's because like it's through that like through that compulsion and that want to be rich and use their code and stuff, like it becomes this um a really terrible kind of complex thing. Um but yeah, I love like their conversation that they have, and that performance by the guy who plays Pete is amazing, even though he's in the
Great
movie for a very short
performance.
amount of time. Um, and then Pete dies because he drank essentially like oil, basically. Like
Yeah.
I like when he drinks it and he's like he stands like, "How is it?" And he's like, "Terrible. I wish I had a barrel full of it," or something like that.
It's a great line.
And
Oh,
yeah, Nightmare Alley has like a lot of like lines and shit like that, like very noir kind of. The thing about like the movies of the 40s, and I was talking to this about my partner about this, like Like these movies like are based more on like literature and like plays and shit like that than they are on other movies. Like when we go to a movie now, that movie is like typically more influenced by like other movies, right?
Yeah.
But movies from the 40s, like they don't really have like a lot of like history to like go back on, right? So they have to like use things like literature and like plays and stuff. Like anything that they can find. So like crime, noir novels and stuff like that, like Nightmare Alley, to be able to which are in which 100 years later we can look back on and be like, wow, that novel is actually like amazing. Um and so I think like yeah, like there's a lot of like really great kind of uh just great, lines and writing, and plots that are kind of convoluted, but are at least like inspired, so you know, it's definitely worth watching movies like this because they give you that satisfaction.
Yeah, it's such a strange moment in film history because, as you said, there is something to lean on. I mean, it's not as if there weren't films before 1947, but the history is so much smaller at that point, and especially just films where people are speaking, because well until mid 1930s, you don't really have many talkies, and so you see all of these amazing writers that we now think of as some of the famous writers of the 20th century who wrote screenplays for like what would
Yeah.
later become famous films because that's how they had to make a living. I mean, we complain about now how authors can't make a living nowadays and no one reads books anymore and blah 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 blah. But it's the exact same thing was going on 100 years ago and 100 years before that and so on and so forth, where a lot of these like incredibly now famous authors and whose work we read as part of like the state standards and what's considered classic literature in every school in the country, a lot of these people wrote screenplays to make a living because that's where the money was and that's where the money is. But now suppose writing screenplays has become its own art form, and most people who write screenplays now, they're not novelists, they're not authors who transition into this field or just write screenplays to make a couple extra bucks. It's people whose whole life is just writing screenplays, which isn't a bad thing or a good thing. It's just perhaps you don't exactly get the beautiful language that you get of this era of the 1940s and the 1950s, where there's just every word they say like is just so amazingly perfect. And now there's so much more interest in the visual side of making a film and so much inspiration on that end
Yeah.
that I think dialogue can often be sort of hidden under the rug. Or even when I was in film school, they told us that great dialogue is hidden, like great dialogue you don't notice, which I think is bullshit because they said the same thing about editing too. They're like, you don't notice great editing. And I think that's complete bullshit. I mean, I loved my film school, I learned a lot of great things there, but I think great dialogue is noticed. I think great editing is noticed. And obviously bad dialogue is also noticed. And I think that's kind of what they were really trying to get at is like when you write bad dialogue, it's very noticeable. Like it's very obvious. And so it's much easier to hide your dialogue in this sort of just it's good enough, right? It sounds good, the plot,
I just
and it's
think,
just
yeah, like, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just think that like really bad dialogue, especially, is written by writers who are like really self-conscious about it. Um, because there's so much like, I don't know, like there's so much to like, there's so much competition and there's so much like, um, stuff to compare yourself to.
Yeah.
Um, I'm talking specifically about like writing screenplays, I guess. Um, and yeah, when you watch like a movie like Nightmare Alley or like Double Indemnity or something like that, it just feels so confident. It doesn't feel like it's not it's not trying to be anything else but what it is in that moment of time, and that to me is like way more interesting than like I don't know, like maybe like a guy trying to like write what maybe teenagers in like the 1990s would say, or like me, like if a movie came out today and it was like a nostalgia racket about like kids and like that to me is like very self-conscious. At least like I'm just like imagining how it would be. Um, but yeah, that's like one of the best parts of this movie and one of the best parts of movies like this. It does have like, for like a noir black and white movie of its time, it does have like, the carnival location I think is a little bit unique. And it's cool.
I love the
You're
carnival.
you're only there for the first hour though, basically.
Yeah.
About like less than an hour.
Yeah, I love the carnival, and I'm gonna get off this in a second, but I just want to say one final thing about sort of the dialogue because it's something that I myself am infinitely interested in since you and I are writers. I mean, we write screenplays, we write books, we write this kind of stuff. And I think part of it too is sort of a style ish sort of thing, or more so people are convinced, or perhaps writers are convinced that people don't want to hear this kind of writing anymore because it is so bold and it does feel like it's pointing itself out. And, beyond just being self conscious, films don't really have this sort of style to them anymore, right? There's not this sort of back and forth with sort of this beautiful language that comes with it all. I mean, it is much more realistic. We've kind of leaned away from the more magical elements of it. And it is a pendulum. I mean, I'm sure it'll swing back and these more sort of magical elements that are
No, I don't think
cinema
that there's gonna
will
be.
be back.
No, I don't
You
think
think it's
there's
gone?
no
It's
swing.
dead?
There's no swinging back. It's over.
I
I don't
don't
know. It's
know.
just like how many movies have you seen in theaters in the past couple of years where you're just like, man, this sucks. The writing sucks. The way that people talk suck. Like it's disgusting.
There's a lot of that. But I think we forget when we look at the past how many
No,
movies
I
have
know.
just been buried,
Yeah.
right? Like there's
No,
always
I
been
agree.
terrible
Yeah.
movies.
No, I
So you just kind of
understand
have to
that.
find you have to
No,
find
I
it,
can.
but it's
But
there.
I'm talking about movies that come out in movie theaters. Like
Right.
nowadays, like not. It's really many movies come out in theaters, but I don't know. These are supposed to be like the best of the best, and it's just I don't know. I'm not trying to like put on like my nostalgia glasses or anything like that, or say like, oh, the past was so much better than it is now. Like I'm really like not trying to be that way because I think being that way is kind of corny and it's
Yeah.
sort of just like running around. Like there's nothing that we can do about it. Um, I just think like yeah, we should like uphold like great movies that are being made today rather than give attention to those that are terrible and suck. Um, that's just how I guess that's just my anyway. Um to kind of I guess continue on with the movie. Like I said, I like the carnival location. And he starts after Pete dies, they start doing like the thing, right, with like the
The
items and
mentalist
stuff.
stuff,
The mentalist stuff. Mentalist stuff.
like the TV show, The
Like
Mentalist.
the TV show Mentalist, your favorite TV show. Um I thought that too when you said Mentalist. I'm like, oh, like the TV show. Um he he starts doing this thing and Molly, she like works at the who's a very beautiful woman by the way.
Very
Um
beautiful woman in this
very
movie.
beautiful woman. Yeah, there's multiple and I
And
thought she
men.
was
I mean, everyone's great looking in this
yeah,
movie.
sure, yeah, yeah. Anyway, like yeah, like Stan is like Molly, let's run away. Da da da. Da. And like he gets into a fight with Bruno, who's the best character in the movie, and they get into like a fight. He like almost kills him, kills Stan. And that's a great moment. And then they leave the circus, and then that's pretty much it until the very end of the movie in terms of like the circus. And then the rest of the movie, they're just kind of like chilling in the city, doing their thing, like Molly and Stan
Chicago.
in Chicago, right? And I like this part of the movie too, though. This part of the movie really reminded me of like Double Indemnity and stuff like that. Um, People trying to get ahead, right? Do some like crazy scam that seems foolproof, but people get jealous. People like they get cold feet. People like betray each other. Like it doesn't work out.
Yeah, he's the great Stanton, and he has this incredible show that everyone loves.
Yeah.
But of course, classic cinema, literature, storytelling technique, someone just doesn't quite believe them. A psychoanalyst, a psychologist, and she records all of her sessions with all like the people she's psychoanalyzing. He's like, ooh, like we can make that's I love how that's the very first thing that comes to his mind. Like all he cares about is just like how can we
Make
profit
more
off of
money.
this?
Hmm.
Like no care for their human decency at all. He's a terrible person. Stan's a terrible person,
Yeah, he's an evil guy. Like he like yeah, like he doesn't care about other
which
people,
is
just cares
why he
about
doesn't
money.
deserve a good ending because he does nothing good. There's like
You
no
don't think
redeeming qualities of this man.
but I know, but at the end of the movie he loses everything and he becomes horribly addicted to alcohol. Like I don't know.
He does.
Finds God or whatever. He
Sure.
I do like one thing I guess I kind of wish was more fleshed out is that like um and I don't know, maybe the book is different, but like it would be cool to see like cuz he kind of develops like a god complex or like a savior kind of
Yeah.
prophet complex which is great. Like I like that stuff in the movie a lot cuz he so like he like so he's like being really successful, but then he meets the I forget her name, Ritter. She's like a
Yes.
psychologist.
Miss Ritter.
And she meets like yeah, she meets Stanton and he finds out that Ritter records all of her conversations, which is like illegal. I don't think you can actually do that in the real world.
I don't know.
Um
40s was a different time. I don't know if you could do
right,
it
yeah,
then.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, maybe back then you could, but she does it secretly. Anyway,
It's a good point. I think you have to tell them.
Stan sees that and he's like, "Oh, this is a gold mine!" Like immediately, it's so funny. He's like, "Oh, this is don't you understand?" And like Ritter's just like, "Man, you're crazy," but okay. And so then they really start to like nail into people and really kind of like he starts to like point out very deep, detailed things that anyone wouldn't know, that no one would know about, but Stan happens to know because he has the recordings. Um, and so he like freaks that woman out, right? Because he's like
Yeah.
talking about like her dead daughter or something like that. And yeah, she like this part of the movie is great. Like when the lady is like, I'm gonna give him all my money.
I mean, it makes sense. I get it. You want to have belief in something. And this film definitely plays with this
Yeah.
idea of faith and the value of faith and when sort of it's utilized. And I will say that another good thing about the GDT is this is the part that's fleshed out more
Yeah.
in that
That's cool.
film is like you see a lot more of the stuff of like him actually like playing that game of working in these fields, which I do feel like we miss a bit of this in this movie. I feel like that part of the movie, like between when he convinces the psychologist to start using those records and like he gains all this fame, like I feel like that section of this movie is pretty short. It's just like it happens, it's there, we did it. But
Yeah.
in the newer version of the movie, that is like fleshed out a lot more. You see a lot more of that, which I think is one of my favorite parts of the film. It's kind of you get to see him like kind of climb up the ladder into like working his way
Yeah.
into this
That's
society
cool.
and how he's sort of like utilizing. And then you see more of that God complex, right? You see him sort of becoming to the point where he genuinely believes to a certain extent that like he's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like it kind of peeks its way through in this movie. This movie just,
mm,
this movie, it gets a lot of extra points because it is a movie from 1947 and it has all those like really great qualities to it. I'm assuming that the GDT movie, even though it's longer and more fleshed out, it it doesn't look or feel like that. It just feels like a
yep.
modern movie. So it's just kind of like,
Exactly.
whatever, I guess.
It doesn't even really
So,
look like a GDT film. Like it doesn't even look like his early work.
well, yeah, because he's like, I mean, a lot has happened in the past 20 years, right? Like he's just like working in digital now is just like he works in like digital film photography now. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's, it looks like a digitally shot film, who cares? But, the Nightmare Alley from 1947, it's a beautiful, timeless black and white,
Oh
like,
God, the black and white looks so good.
even the production, even though it's like well, I don't know, the production here is a little bit lofty. It's not too bad. Like it's pretty, it's pretty good. I didn't. They're on a boat. They're at the
Boat's
carnival. They're on
good. Carnival's
trains.
great.
Like they're on all kinds of different things, and um, yeah, they're very. It's a busy movie. There's a lot of stuff going on. I think they're not just like in like one small room after another. Um, but yeah, I love like I do like when the movie doesn't show everything though. Like so like when the old lady is like, I'm gonna give him all my money, and then the older guy is like, I'm gonna meet Stan. I want to meet this Stan and see what's up. And we don't see that meeting, and he just is
No,
explaining it to her. I love that. I like that decision. I'm okay with that decision. We didn't need to see the meeting.
you see the
I just
meeting in the 2021 one.
Oh, really? That's what I
Yeah,
figured. I don't know. Maybe I, that's fine. Um, but yeah, and again though, in digital, you can shoot as much many scenes you want because
exactly. Yeah.
you don't have to worry about uh, running out of film. And here it's like, well, Stan and Ritter need to meet anyway to talk about it, so he could just talk
You
about what
get it.
happened.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love him talking about it too, like how it happened and like how the meeting went and stuff like that. You I like when a movie like and the movie too is asking the viewer to like just use their imagination. You don't
Mm.
which I like when movies do that. Like I like when you know you're smart enough to imagine it yourself. You just imagine it yourself, and but I like that because it allows the viewer to think instead of just like watching one scene after another of the like it happening in front of you. I like that a lot.
Yeah. I do like this desire, and of course part of it is just a question of economics and the way they shot movies during this era and just not
Right.
having the funds to show everything and shooting on film and just how expensive it was compared to how cheap it can be, not necessarily is, but how cheap it can be to make a movie now. And so by the fact that they're forced to make a movie in a certain way, we kind of get these moments where you're sort of forced to imagine, or you kind of have to talk around scenes, which is very
Yeah.
creative and it kind of forces that creativity. Because I do love those moments where they have to like talk about things that you don't actually see. And
Right.
what that also does is it plays on this level where you don't know who to trust because you're like, well, is
That's true.
Stan
Yeah.
telling the
That's
truth?
good.
Like
That's
you're
true.
kind of
Yeah.
actually
Because
questioning
you
it
didn't
where
see it. You don't really
exactly.
know. Yeah.
Right. You don't know what's
That's
going on. You
true.
don't actually see it.
Yeah.
Where I think it's one of the problems with the GDT film is because you see everything, like you have this sense of like wanting to believe him and it doesn't feel as tragic. Where here, because you never know, because there's so much that's omitted, you have to
Yeah.
constantly be questioning everything. You're constantly questioning, like, well, is this what really happened? I mean, I think he said that, they said
Yeah.
that, but we don't actually see a lot of this stuff. And so I think often we get obsessed with this idea, whether it's in literature or film, of showing and not telling, right? We love this idea of we need to show them everything and never explain it. But sometimes telling and not showing, I think, is actually better because it creates this sense of anxiety and fear and just not knowing who to trust.
Yeah. Yeah, and you get the great scene where on the boat and they're like talking to each other and stuff about like ripping people off and all this stuff and and then you get that other meeting too, right? Like I think it's soon after that meeting where he meets with Molly and he's like that's a great scene where he's like, "Look, I need you to act like a dead lady. I need you to pretend to be like a dead lady." And I love her like performance in that scene by that actor by Molly, where she's just like,
Yeah.
"You're crazy. Like, are you insane? Like, you're not God. Like, you can't bring like people back to life. Like this is you're fucking with this guy. Like, really, really fucking with this guy. Like, it's gone beyond just like playing a little trick. Like, you're really like trying to fuck with his perception of reality."
Yeah, she's truly had enough at this moment. And by the way, the outfits that everyone wears, great
Yeah,
outfits. Oh
yeah,
my
just
God.
40s. Yeah, shit. Yeah.
Wonderful outfits, especially Ritter. I think she has the best fits, like
Yeah, she's got
trench
like
coat. I'm like, oh
she's
my
got like
God.
yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. She's cool. Yeah.
Incredible costumes. But that is a great moment because these performances, I think this goes back to the idea of this sort of self-consciousness we have now in film, where everyone's either like performing to win an Oscar, right? Every actor,
Yeah.
like that's their saying. They're like, oh, this is gonna be the best performance ever. And or it's just like so off the wall silly that there's just nothing to it. But in this era, like and I think this goes back to like we're still pretty new to film, and so there's still sort of this play like aspect to acting and the way that people act, but just like the ability to sort of be raw and just like express these like wild
Yeah.
emotions and just to be a little wild and silly and absurd, even though it may come off as a little strange to the modern viewer. I think it makes the film better. I think it works, and I would really love to see more of that.
I guess, yeah. I think so. Yeah. I always that kind of reminds me whenever I see like a movie with like Leonardo DiCaprio in it. Like he's so good. He's a really great actor. Like I think that's
Great actor.
undeniable. But
Yeah.
like whenever I am watching a movie and I'm seeing him like really act where he's like yelling and kind of freaking out, I'm just like, man, like he's trying so hard. Like and it's not, I'm not trying to be like disrespectful. It's just like it just feels so like even after all these years, you know, he's it still kind of feels like this, it's still this self-consciousness to his
Yeah,
performances,
exactly.
and that can kind of like he kind of teeters on on the balance between like being like convincing but not convincing, you know. So I don't know. It's yeah, I think that's a good example.
Yeah. And part of it, of course, is again a question of economics, which I understand both ends and both arguments because the 1940s is very much an era of the studio system. And so actors were basically owned by a production company and they had like a salary. So
Yeah.
instead of working for a specific film, they worked for a production company and they just worked for that like 20th century or whatever, right? They worked for that company
Yeah.
and then every couple of months they make a film. And so part of it is just like actors acted in a lot more films because like that was their job.
Yeah.
That's their 9 to 5 from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., 5 days a week. Like they would go in and they'd act and they'd be in a ton of movies. That's why people
Yeah,
like
and it's
Fred Astaire are in
probably
so many movies.
and these operations are probably efficient, you know, for the
Yes.
most part. So I'm assuming, yeah, you would just kind of walk in, do your thing, and leave. You know, I'm sure it's not a hassle, you know. But now movies, like they have a lot of languish, you know, like they take
Hmm.
a lot of time to make. Um, I'm sure the GDT movie took years to make.
Right.
Um, and you know, a lot of stuff going on in it, and actors are, you know, they have to
So
languish over everything, and I don't know. Yeah, it's just I don't know if there's necessarily like a right or wrong way to make a movie, obviously, but
sure.
it just creates like a different effect. It just kind of creates like the product that you end up watching just is just like it'll just be fundamentally different than if it was made a different way.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to celebrate the studio system. There was a lot of things wrong with the studio system, and certainly a lot of people within the system that were underpaid, and especially like when we talk about directors and editors and the lack of sort of creative leniency that they were allowed. But I think one of the nice
Yeah.
things about it for everyone is the fact that whether you're a director, a writer, an editor, and especially actors, and I think this is part of the self-conscious thing, is every time an actor is in a film, that's a performance, right? They have to be proving that they're worth being hired
Yeah.
for the next job so they can get the no matter how big of a star they are, right? Even Leo, like he's got to
Yeah,
be ready
yeah,
for the next
that's true.
job. He's got to prove that
It
he's
always feels like
worthy.
he's trying to prove himself, but it's like I don't know. At that, it's like and now at this point, it's like you know you don't necessarily have to be that way. But I understand.
Yeah.
I get it.
So there's not really a good solution here. I just wish there could be a way where we don't necessarily have to have the box of the studio system, but still, whatever form you're in, whether you're the director, writer, editor, actor, you're not constantly sort of in this place where you're always looking for work. I mean, you're basically a contractor, you're a private contractor, which is why, of course, they have unions and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, it's why television works so well and why so many writers still work in television is because that's a 9 to 5 steady job. And if you're
Yeah. It's more steady. Yeah.
like even if you're Paul Thomas Anderson, like you have to go get fucking funding for your next
That's
film.
true. You kind of have to grovel. If you're Martin Scorsese, you got to grovel. Like
Right.
everybody has to grovel and prove themselves. That's true.
Sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sucks.
Whatever. Anyway.
Nightmare Alley.
My, we got to like, yeah, talking about Iron Alley, you get to the next scene, which is my favorite scene in the entire movie. This is like one of the greatest scenes in all of movies, which is
Go on.
where they're in the garden and they're trying to trick him.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
one of the best scenes in the movie. And I was like cackling watching it because it's just like, you can feel it coming, right? Like you could feel like she's gonna appear,
You know
or like
exactly what's gonna happen.
she like appears. But I was kind of surprised, right? Because like she appears and then she's like wearing the outfit and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
he's like, "Oh, it's what Dory is her name or something like that, or
Something. Yeah,
Dory."
Dory. Yep.
Yeah. She's like, "Oh, Dory." Oh, it's like his dead girlfriend. And he's like freaking out and stuff. And Stan, like he's got such a like a shit eating like grin on his face, like, "Haha, I got the sucker.
I
Like
got you.
I got him. He's gonna give me so much money now." And Molly freaks out. She's like, "No, I can't do it." Like that was crazy seeing that happen of her just like, and then they get into a fight and then he pushes. Oh man, that is such a good um moment in that movie.
Yeah.
Uh, I love that. I love that scene.
It's a great moment. And of course they recreate it in GTTs. And for some reason, I don't know if this is in the book, and I don't know if this is really like suggested in the movie at all. Maybe it is. Like that he's like connected to the mafia. Is that it's definitely in there in the
Who, the
GDT.
old
I don't
guy?
know the old guy, the rich
Oh,
guy.
I
I
just
don't
think
know if
that
that's
he's rich, and
really you just think he's
in
rich.
the old movie, I think he's just like a fucking rich motherfucker.
Okay. Because
Um,
there's like guns involved, and I think he kills the guy in the GDT, like he shoots him, Stanton does. So instead of just like pushing him, so he's like on the run for that murder too. So the stakes are a little different.
yeah,
Not that they need to be. I think the stakes are already high enough. But that is a great moment when he goes and right after that, right? He goes and grabs the money and he's like, you keep some. And she's like, no, 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 you need to take it all because
yeah,
a woman, tricking a man would never expect that. And he rips it open as he's in the taxi and you can like see his face. Great performance, great moment where like he realizes that he's basically been tricked, right? The trickster has officially been tricked,
right.
and he goes back and
That's so
and
cool. She destroys him.
she just destroys him with words too. It's not even like I think that's what I love about
Yeah,
femme fatales and this noir era is like the way that you can just like destroy someone through just like talking. Like there's no like physical action. No one's blowing up. There's no guns. There's no violence. Even in the new GDT one, like there's all of the violence and like everything's very aggressive and physical contact. Where this one, it's like you don't need any of that, and I don't think you need it at all because it just works. And I mean, she basically convinces him that like he's gone insane, and it's great. Like for a second, he almost believes her. Where he's like, maybe I did. Like maybe this was all of the. It's great. Oh man, what a wonderful moment.
destroys him with facts and logic. Well, yeah, and yeah, and yeah, that just reminds me of movies like Double Indemnity and stuff like that. And so he is just kind of like, yeah, he's penniless, right? And he's like,
Yeah,
all right, Molly, you can just leave and I'll just chill here. And this is
love
basically
train
like the end of
scenes.
yeah, this is basically like the end of the movie where it's like, yeah, like he becomes an alcoholic, of course.
Of course he does.
Because it's almost kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like meeting the destiny of like Pete.
Yep.
And he goes to the he goes to a random circus and he's like, "Hey, I
Hmm.
used to work in the circus or whatever." And the guy's like, "Well, you want to be a geek?" Which a geek is like a mongrel or something like that. Like
They're basically like a human that they treat like an animal. There is a lot more of that too in the
yeah,
GDT. Like they put him in the GDT one, they like put him in a
that's I'm
cage and they
assuming.
beat
Yeah,
him.
they can do more stuff with it.
It's awful. And they make him eat live chickens. They do that in the original. I mean, you don't see him eat the live chickens, but you know what happens. It's gross.
Yeah. And so like but you never really see any of that stuff unfortunately. You just see him like get upset and start to like run around and hit people. Um again
Yeah.
like yeah, maybe the ending is not super great and then, just kind of skipping to the
It
chase
ends
like he
very
sees
quickly.
Molly. Yeah,
And
it
there's
ends
no
very,
skipping a chase. It's
these
literally like
movies,
2 seconds later.
these movies end really quickly. These movies end really quickly where like he reunites with Molly and he stops being crazy. And like the guys, some of the guys have like a thing these 40s movies, they always have to have the last word, right? Like they always have to have like, and then that was it, or like, what does he say? Like how did he fall so hard? He reached too
You
high
reach
or
too
something
high. They
like
love
that.
to say the
Yeah,
theme. Like that's
they
always the
love
last
saying
line of
shit like
every
that.
noir. They're like, let's
Yeah.
say the exact theme of this movie in this final
Yeah,
line.
like the theme, the if in case you didn't
What
get the
I learned in this
idea,
movie
what
was
we this is what we learned. Here's the movie distilled in a sentence, and then it ends. And yeah, and that's the ending. Again, maybe not the greatest ending, but it didn't like bother me. Like it's fine.
no, it's fine. I mean, I'd rather that than like some, long drawn out ending. You don't need that. The end at the end of the film, perfect. You need that. I think they should bring that back. I think we need more of that. I think every
The
movie
end.
should have the end at the end, so everyone knows when the movie's done. We don't have to sit around waiting for credits or any of that shit. Just the
You
end
want
and then cut to black.
you
That's
don't like
it.
after credits. You don't like the classic after credit scenes of like
People need to stop. They need to stop.
this fuck. Yeah, I don't fuck with that shit either. I just like when a movie starts and then it ends, and you're like,
And
okay.
then it ends, and
and
then you're
then
just done.
yeah, old movies too, they don't have like credits, they just have like they just end.
Yeah, I mean they'll have credits at the beginning, but even that's
Right,
pretty
yeah,
short. Which I much rather have the credits at the beginning because you gotta get to set the mood and the tone, which some movies still do, especially like movies that
yeah,
homage older films.
right, yeah, they
But
do that all the
I
time.
think all
Yeah,
movies put your credits at the beginning, set the mode, set the tone, and then just cut to black. Like we don't need any of that shit at the end. It's just it ruins it. It's like it ruins the whole experience. It's bullshit. I remember when I was in film school, we watched Citizen Kane, and I had seen it a bunch of times before, and since then, of course, I've seen it a bunch more times because it's Citizen Kane. But we
yeah,
watched it in the theater, and it was on DVD, like Blu-ray or whatever, some shit.
yeah.
And the ending credits, like right after this big moment, right? They realize it's the sled, and blah
Oh
blah blah.
shit,
Rosebud is
oh
the
my
sled.
god.
I know that's a
you you
spoiler.
you you spoiled the movie for me.
Spoiled the most famous ending of all time.
I watched the
But
beginning. I played the movie and I paused at the beginning to go do the podcast.
and so it's this extremely like somber and sad moment, and then it cuts to the credits, and it's like the super happy go lucky music, and it's like all the actors like smiling towards the camera.
Yeah,
So
cool.
funny. And that's probably the original credits because it's the
Right,
actors like doing the
right. Woo. Yeah.
I just can't imagine. I really can't. So don't do
I'm
that.
a- yeah. I'm gonna give my final thoughts
Do it.
on Nightmare Alley 1947. Good movie, pretty yeah, just a great movie. Just I like the settings, I like the way it looks, I like the way it sounds. Um, I do like the story, kind of like kind of a classic, kind of like let's make some money, like noir 40s story. Crime doesn't pay noir 40s story. It's just kind of all it's pretty classic movie stuff. Very very classic movie stuff. It's just kind of it just scratches every itch. It's got great actors in it. I don't know, it's just all kind of like self-explanatory in terms of like why it's like fun to watch and like why it's so good. It's just kind of is the way that it is. Yeah, I would give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. I went through this phase 4 years ago. It was before COVID, so probably 2019, maybe even 2018. It might have been before Emily and I were married. We were living in our first apartment, and every morning I'd wake up and I'd watch a movie. And Criterion Channel, oh, I don't even know if it was Criterion Channel or if it was Filmstruck. No, I think it was Criterion Channel at this point. They released this noir collection, which was like 50 films. And for like 2 months, all I watched was this collection of noir films. And I don't know what it is about noir that I love so much. I think part of it's just the writing, that mid Atlantic accent, the whole crime doesn't pay sort of thing, which is at the core of so much noir, but not all noir, of course. Some crime does pay, but usually not. The femme fatale, I don't know. There's just something about it that has long been one of my favorite genres of film, and still is one of my favorites. I don't watch nearly as much film noir as I used to, but it just works in a way that nothing else seems to click in the same way. And this is just such a joy to watch. It had all of the classic noir moments, and it is the exact same story of the GDT film. So I knew pretty much exactly what was going to happen, line for line, moment for moment, but that did not make the film any less enjoyable. I was surprised by the ending, which I've talked a bit about throughout the podcast. So it's fine. I mean, it's definitely not something that's largely affecting the film. And I think the film is so good that it doesn't really matter how it ends. And he still becomes a geek. It just doesn't last nearly as long as the original. So I'm with you. I'm going to give this a solid 8 out of 10.
Very good.
All right, y'all. Thank you for listening. You can find everything I do at Austin Lugo 12.
I'm on Letterbox at Retro Andrew, RETR0 Andrew.
And you can find this podcast wherever you hear podcasts. You also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at With Nothing to Say, or through our Patreon, patreon.com/With Nothing to Say. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you again.